Welcome to the podcast series showcasing the winners of the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Awards. We established this award to honor the outstanding contributions of individuals nationwide who work tirelessly to advance core pillars of Dyslexia Canada's mission, ensuring that all Canadian children have access to universal early screening and evidence-based, systematic, explicit foundational reading instruction. Right now, just over half of Canadian children are living in provinces committed to implementing that. Alberta has been setting the pace nationally by embracing evidence-based reading instruction and early screening. It's definitely a positive step forward. In this episode, we'll be speaking with an individual who has made a significant contribution towards this achievement. Mike McMann, the Superintendent of Fort Vermilion School Division, has become one of Alberta's top advocates for the science of reading over the years, and he's a recipient of the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Awards. Congratulations, Mike. You've dedicated your career to studying and educating others about dyslexia and reading challenges. Now, prior to that, did you have any personal connection or experiences related to dyslexia?
I am a struggling reader, and I grew up in a resource room when I was in public school. And basically, for me, audiobooks have changed my life. And so reading has always been a passion of mine. And how do we make the system better so that we don't have kids that struggle in reading? And what we know about it is that if we don't do a very good job between kindergarten and grade 3, then we are creating an astronomical problem for that child to be successful. I'm one of the lucky ones that have figured out strategies to get through the system, but others are not so lucky, and then the system basically does not open doors for them. And so that's really my passion around reading.
So what worked for you?
Honestly, for me, the invention of audiobooks really changed my life. I could listen and I could hear speech, but my fluency was so poor that I couldn't get to comprehension. If comprehension is the pinnacle of reading, I understood oral language very well. And so understanding oral language and adhering to listening intently to hear what people are saying and then ask questions got me through the system. Like, I'm ABD from a PhD, so it also then impacts your writing too as well. And I always say, every good writer has an editor, and luckily that has helped me too as well. They're expensive, but those sort of systems allow you to do that. Now, I suppose with AI, it would be a little bit different in terms of dictating what you want to say into it and it spitting it out for you.
When you took over the role of superintendent in Fort Vermilion in 2017, 57% of the students there couldn't read at grade level by grade 3. How are the students in your district faring now?
We've been doing this work now for 7 years with the help of, and we've been intently researched with George Giorgio and the University of Alberta. And now when we get our kids to grade 9, we're above the provincial standard. We have 78% of our kids now are above provincial standard. And what we're seeing primarily in grade 1 is we're seeing still our group of kids coming into school and gaining 15 standardized score points by the end of grade 1. And 5 score points basically is equivalent to 1 year of growth. So with 15 score points, our kids come into grade 1 and grow 3 years, even if they're at a little bit of a disadvantage because they're ESL, whether they're speaking a First Nations language or they're speaking Plautdietsch. We're seeing a huge growth in grade 1, 2, and 3, which really sets them up for success in the later years, for sure, as the language gets more complex and the problems get more complex.
What transformations have occurred in the approach to reading instruction since you took over in 2017, leading to the remarkable success in enhancing the reading proficiency at the Division's 13 schools, Mike?
Well, really, ultimately, it is the research around the science of reading and structured literacy supports with supports and interventions that have taken place. So we put interventions in place, and immediately, as soon as a child scores low, they go into an intervention that's specific for either decoding or vocabulary or oral language, so that we can get on it right away and get them caught up with strategies in terms of decoding words or those sort of things. We've used probably Empower, which is the best, absolute best program out there for dyslexia and for our struggling readers around decoding. It comes out of the Sick Children's Hospital in Toronto, an absolute phenomenal program that works. And so when you adhere to a scope and sequence of when you should learn singular letters, when to use double letters, which is the work through George, and have a strategic plan on how to teach reading, scientifically we know how to teach it. It's whether we do it or not. And so I always say we're either creating readers or we're creating criminals, and there's a direct correlation for people that can't read and the incarceration rates in this country. And so as teachers and as a school system, if we're not teaching kids how to read, we should all be fired. Like, I truly believe that. Like, we have to be able to do that well, and the science of reading shows us exactly how. So not using a program per se, like Fontes and Pinnell or those sort of pieces, but using what teachers inherently know from their learning at post-secondary, and what we pay them for is to think around problems that children have and find interventions that get them through that next step so that they can progress in their reading.
Bureaucracy often has a way of getting in the way of progress. So how did you get around it to get this program up and running?
Well, I always sort of ignore the bureaucracy to start with, and we start a plan, and then we prove that it works, and then they usually come along, because no one really turns away from a success story. But it's still a struggle in this province and across this country. There's still a number of people that haven't subscribed to the science of reading or structured literacy supports, which to me doesn't make any sense. Systems are hard to change, and sometimes when you get attuned to a specific program that you like, it's comfortable. And of course, when you're doing research, there's always risk, but there's always reward too. I think we're too afraid sometimes to say, we screwed up, we need to circle back. That didn't work. We'd rather stay in our comfort zone, and our comfort zone, I always say learning begins at the end of the comfort zone. And if we stay in that zone, how many kids are we missing? One of my favorite authors is Adam Grant. Hidden Potential is his latest book. And it's, what is this system doing to block that hidden potential of kids, rather than opening it up so all kids can be successful and thrive?
Your district schools have embraced structured literacy supports. Can you provide an example of the changes in reading instruction methods now compared to before?
Yeah, before there was a lot more autonomy in the system and really adhering to a program. And we used Fontes and Pinnell for 12 years, and I always say, when you know better, you do better. And at that time, that we thought that was the best possible piece. And so the shift really was about a measure, and that's the biggest shift. And we were using Cat 5 as a measure, and it wasn't really telling us anything. We were doing it at the end of May, and so then they would go off for summer, and some people would look at it and some people are not. And now we use what's called the 3 T's, which is the TOSREC, the TOSRIF, and the TOWER, which measures decoding, comprehension, and fluency. And we do it 3 times a year. So we do it right beginning of September. We also do it in January, and then we do it in May, so that we have check-in points throughout the year that strategically look at, is the kids progressing in literacy, in reading. And so when you do that, there's a lot more accountability in the system. But it allows you to put that is the support in the system, the measure to support the system to move forward, especially with interventions. Most of our educational assistants are now called interventionists. They have a specific role to move a group of kids, either in literacy and numeracy, to move them forward. They're not there necessarily to just be in a classroom for classroom support. They have a specific job. We've changed that dramatically in terms of a structure, and almost doubled their wage in terms of what we expect from them. And so we're going to pay you a living wage to be a part of that. And we're probably the highest paid educational assistants across this country. So we're proud of the work that they do, and that structure helps really support that. So one of the systems that we use, especially in decoding, is Empower. We use precision reading. We use a number of different sort of interventions that help move kids forward, especially depending on whether it's decoding, fluency, vocabulary, oral language. We believe there's actually 6 pillars of reading now that the research is complete, There's typically only 5, and we believe the 6th pillar is actually oral language. So we're starting an oral language screener in kindergarten, all the way through kindergarten, the first year of grade 1, so that we can really test to see what our kids know when they're coming in, especially if they are ESL.
When you were talking about oral languages as well, I thought you might be alluding to our Indigenous students.
Yeah, both that and both our Mennonite students too as well speak Low German or Plautdietsch, and so they too often that's the only language that's spoken at home. And we also have a number of Filipino students that their first language is Tagalog, and so it's amazing up here in the north how many different languages we actually have, and English may not be their first for the majority of our kids.
Mike, you've put a lot of focus on getting these children educated through the program, but you've also put a lot of focus on teacher training. Now, for instance, you insisted that all district teachers become versed in University of Alberta professor George Giorgio's reading program, which is science-based. Is that one of the keys to your success?
Yeah, 100%. And we continue to work with George. He'll be back next year to do a refresher, especially in grade 1. We continue to work with Christy Dunn, who is also part of that team, and she's really helping us a lot with morphology, especially in grade 3, 4, 5, and 6. We don't really sign up for research that doesn't impact our goals, which is literacy, numeracy, connectivity, and career. I always say the research is what puts the fuel in the bus, and then it's up to us to drive it. And then it's up to us to really look at the curriculum and say, how are we adhering to the research that we've been taught, especially in the science-based research that George gives us. It has been a game changer for our district for sure.
It sounds like it's ever evolving as well.
It is. I don't know if we'll ever arrive. We will always attempt to continue to be better. Continuous improvement is our strategy here. The system is moving, but so is the clientele moving in terms of, more issues around mental health and those sort of things. And so you always have to keep changing the game. I think for lots of years, the education system kind of gets stuck. And I don't really like getting stuck because I don't think it perpetuates the system forward.
So in those terms, what are you doing right now to continue to improve the literacy levels of all your students? So
right now we're continuing that work, but our biggest work right now is both in writing and in morphology. And so having kids write every day. I guess in the past, sometimes they were seen as two different entities, and you can't be a good writer without being a good reader, and vice versa. And so writing has been a big part, and so we do actually subscribe to a writing strategy that is working, especially all the way through high school, because of course most of their big state tests are writing. Half of it is a writing initiative around it, right, where 30% of that mark is in a written piece. But also to see a written language and understand and comprehend, breaking down those words, they go hand in hand rather than separate entities. And morphology is really the root of words and understanding of how that works. So for example, if you understand that gress means to move, it doesn't say what direction, but if you understand that gress is the root of a word, regress, you know what, aggressive, so once kids start to understand and break down the morphology of a certain word, they can then say, oh, this is what this means, or this is what this means. And once you have a kid that can read at the end of grade 3, the morphology is it's magical to watch them even look at a word they've never seen before and digest it.
Alberta is one of the few provinces that has embraced evidence-based reading instruction and early screening. Now, there are some challenges when it comes to implementing these practices consistently. What do you believe would be the necessary next steps to help that happen in Alberta?
No one likes to be told what to do, if for lack of a better statement. But the reality is it's the right thing to do. And if we're doing the right assessments, I'm not opposed to the mandate around screenings. I think they only have 2, and we actually have 3, because I know it works. And if you're not mandating those, or if you're not doing those pieces, then what are you doing to measure it? Because when we talk to our parents and our stakeholders in our jurisdiction, there's not one of them that does not want to know how their child is doing with reading. And so if that is the case, then why are we balking at moving forward around reading? They want to know if they're getting screwed over in math, whether that's with an interest rate or a loan or those sort of pieces. So those two subjects are dead simple. So why are we not adhering to that? I think sometimes that's where the bureaucracy sort of gets in place. In some of our other provinces around the country, it is much more directive from the government in terms of how we're going to do it. But it's getting out of that comfort zone to say we can do things better and do it differently.
I guess get beyond that fear of change and concerns about liability.
Totally. And if we want kids to experiment through their entire learning in making mistakes and fixing them, why are we as a system not also that nimble? Where would we be if we were?
That's a very good point. Now, I'm sure there are other superintendents within the system in Alberta that see what you're doing and are impressed by the results that you're getting. What kind of advice could you give them?
Yeah, I think we've grown astronomically since 2017. I think there's probably now 20-some jurisdictions out of the 62 that are going down the science of reading for sure. I think the biggest is to find the right measure that works for you. Our measures are definitely way more enhanced than the provincial measures that are out there, which they are allowed to be used, and we report on our measures. Don't be afraid of finding the measure that works so that you can change practice tomorrow. Our results go into Power BI, which is with Microsoft, and the next day a teacher can put a child in an intervention. It's that instantaneous. We don't wait for a report. We don't wait for marks to come back. And as soon as they enter their score, they have their whole class set. They get a red arrow or a green arrow that the child is progressing or they're not. And then they can look at which part of reading, which of the 6 pillars that the child needs help with to change their trajectory tomorrow, rather than waiting for it to come back for a few days to say, oh, now what do I do? And our teachers, I have probably the best teachers in the province. I know I do. And they love the fact that they get immediate response and that they can do something with it tomorrow. And so find a measure that will give your teachers the power to change the life of kids the very next day.
As a superintendent, you probably don't get to spend much time in the classroom, but I imagine you get feedback from your teachers. What are they saying to you about this?
When we started in 2017, I remember being called to a grade 1 classroom, and before we started, and I said to them, I really want to go down this route. And most of them had more, they all had more experience than me. There was probably over 100 years of experience between the three of them. And I said, what do you got to lose? What do you got to lose if we give this a go and it works? If it doesn't go, you can blame me. And if it does work, you can win. So what do you got to lose? And they probably were my 3 biggest champions after that first year, going, this does make a difference. This is making a difference. And so I think the only thing I think teachers would say is that there's probably a lot more accountability in the system around each individual child. Our model really is moving the dial on every kid. Not an average, not a group. You just move the dial on every kid. Every student matters. Every student counts. Move the dial on every kid. And I think that adds a little bit more accountability and a little bit more pressure in this system. But I've yet to see a teacher that doesn't want every one of their students be successful.
That sounds like the reason most people get into teaching to begin with.
Yeah, totally.
So what's your vision for the future?
Our vision for the future is to continue to work, and we're doing the exact same work on the numeracy side too as well. And we're seeing substantial growth in numeracy because we also know that children that struggle with reading, especially even students that have dyslexia, also struggle in other subject areas because, you got wit and word problems and those sort of things. And do you even understand what the question is asking? But our biggest move lately is moving into the career focus, and we have formed the largest collegiate in the province of Alberta, in that every one of our high schools is part of a collegiate, which basically means that we believe every student that is capable will complete post-secondary credits, if not a diploma or certification in post-secondary before they leave us. And so we've built an $11 million project around the collegiate. We have a number of kids that are either in nursing or they're in their first years of education or they're in any of the trades, plumbing, carpentry, electrical, and they are doing that while they're still in high school. And the best part about that is that what we know is that 90% of kids that go into post-secondary before they leave high school go on to complete the degree. And the best part for parents is it's free. And so between those two initiatives, as well as continuing to support the reading with George and Christy, we are moving forward and trying to change the entire face of what has been known as the education system in this province in northern Alberta.
It sounds like there's a lot of exciting things happening in your school division, Mike, and congratulations again on the award.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the series showcasing the winners of the 2024 Dyslexia Canada Educational Excellence Awards. To learn more about this year's winners, visit dyslexiacanada.org, where you can read a blog about each of them. Now stay tuned for our next episode.